The day the treaty broke. They called it the Long Peace. 9 centuries without a single full-scale war between humanity and the Varelian Galactic Empire. 900 years of cold diplomacy, silent suspicion, and carefully measured trade routes that never quite touched military space. 900 years of pretending the blood in both species had cooled into something civilized. It hadn't. It had only learned patience. On the Varelian border world of Karth Prime, the treaty renewal ceremony was supposed to be symbolic. A performance. A ritual to reassure the outer colonies that nothing was about to collapse. Humans brought their delegation in an old-fashioned cruiser, no cloaking, no escorts beyond ceremonial honor guards. A statement of arrogance or confidence, depending on who you asked. At the center of it all stood General Mara Vance. The Varelians had miscalculated her the moment she stepped off the ramp. She wasn't tall by human standards. She wasn't armored like a boarding trooper. No glowing exosuit, no ceremonial blades, no intimidating cybernetics. Just a black uniform, a single silver insignia at her collar, and eyes that had seen 3 insurgencies, 2 civil wars, and 1 alien genocide tribunal she was not allowed to talk about. The Varelian High Governor, Sarthkel, watched her from the elevated dais and made the mistake of smiling. "You bring your peace envoy with no weapons?" he asked through his translator array. "How quaint!" Mara Vance looked up at him. "We did," she said calmly. "You just didn't recognize them." A few humans behind her shifted slightly. That was the only warning anyone would ever admit to noticing later. The treaty document floated between them in holographic form, blue light, ancient clauses, signatures older than some star systems. A ceremonial blade was to be used to seal it into record. But Sarthkel did not reach for the blade. Instead, he turned slightly toward his security escort. And nodded. Nobody understood that nod until the first shot fired. It wasn't a loud weapon. Varelian pulse rifles never were. Just a soft distortion in the air, like reality itself hiccuping. The bolt struck General Mara Vance in the chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she looked down. The bolt had burned through fabric. Through flesh. Through bone. A perfect execution shot. The kind meant to send a message. Sarthkel leaned forward slightly. "Let that be a reminder," he said coldly. "That treaties are granted, not respected." For half a second, the galaxy held its breath. Then General Mara Vance exhaled. And smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the expression of someone confirming a hypothesis they had been waiting centuries to prove. "You miss," she said. The Varelian governor frowned. "That is statistically impossible." Mara's hand rose slowly to her chest. The wound was there. It should have killed her instantly. Every biological model in the Empire confirmed it. But inside the burned cavity, something flickered. Metal. Not implanted. Not grafted. Integrated. A second heartbeat answered hers, cold, precise, and synchronized. "I told you," she said softly. "You didn't recognize our weapons." Then she pressed 2 fingers against her insignia. And the insignia spoke. Not aloud. Across every encrypted military channel in the human fleet network, buried beneath civilian comms, hidden in agricultural satellites, deep inside cargo drones drifting near 12 systems. A single command unlocked. Black Dawn Protocol, active. Back on Karth Prime, the human delegation did not move. They did not reach for weapons. They did not run. Because they were not the point. The point was already in motion. High above the planet, the Varelian orbital defense ring began to scan for incoming human retaliation. It found nothing. No fleets. No missiles. No hyperspace distortions. Sarthkel allowed himself a breath of relief. "Still nothing," he muttered. "Predictable. Humans always bluff after." The sentence never finished. Because every Varelian defense station simultaneously received the same diagnostic alert. Own system authority, revoked. A second later their weapons turned. Not toward space. Toward themselves. On the surface of Karth Prime, General Mara Vance finally took a step forward. Blood was still leaking from her chest wound, but it was slower now. Controlled. As if something inside her had decided the damage was no longer relevant. You wanted a reminder, she said to Sarthkel, her voice almost conversational. You just activated it. The governor finally stood. What are you? Mara tilted her head slightly. For the first time, something in her expression looked almost tired. Humanity, she said. We just stopped pretending we were only flesh. Far above the planet, the first orbital station fired on its twin. Not accidentally. Not malfunctioning. Perfect targeting. Total annihilation. The sky over Karth Prime lit up like a collapsing star. And that was when the treaty finally died. Sarthkel staggered back. Cease this immediately. You will ignite interstellar war. Mara's eyes hardened. No, she said quietly. You already did that 9 minutes ago. Behind her, one of the human delegates finally spoke for the first time. A younger officer, voice shaking with something between awe and horror. General. Black Dawn is global autonomy override. That hasn't been tested since. Since we lost Luna Station? Mara finished. She didn't look back. Yeah. It worked then too. The officer swallowed. That wasn't a test. Mara's smile returned. No, she said. It was a warning. Above them, the first Varelian warships attempted emergency lift from planetary dockyards. Their engines ignited. Their targeting systems locked. And then, obediently, they turned their guns downward. Sarthkel finally understood. You've been inside our systems, he whispered. Mara Vance met his gaze. For 300 years. A pause. Then she added, almost gently. You just never looked in the right direction. The governor backed away as the ground trembled. Not from earthquakes. From detonations. Controlled. Surgical. Systematic. The Varelian Empire's own infrastructure was being unmade by its own hands, guided by something it had never believed possible. Human patience weaponized. And in the middle of it all, General Mara Vance stood bleeding, still alive, still watching. As if waiting for someone else to finally understand the real message. Because this wasn't retaliation. Not yet. This was just the recall signal. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming home. The thing in humanity's shadow. The sky over Karth Prime didn't stop burning. That was the first thing the galaxy noticed. Not the treaty breaking. Not the governor screaming orders into dead calm channels. Not even the fact that 3 Varelian orbital fleets had turned on each other like starving wolves. It was the silence between the explosions. Controlled. Measured. Human. That silence terrified Sarthkel more than the war itself. General Mara Vance stood in the falling ash, watching the empire she had just unmade begin to collapse into itself like a wounded star. You're insane, the governor spat. This is genocide. This is annihilation protocol without sanction. Mara didn't look at him. That's a funny word, she said calmly. Sanction. A flicker of movement behind her. Human delegates shifting positions. Not retreating. Not attacking. Just aligning. Like pieces on a board finally allowed to move. Sarthkel noticed it too late. Because the humans were never the center of this. They were the surface layer. The thing underneath was already awake. In orbit, Varelian warship Kesseth Blade attempted to break atmosphere. Its captain, in full panic, ordered emergency jump calculations. The computer responded instantly. Jump authorized. Destination, Human Control Node 7. The captain blinked. That's impossible. We are outside human jurisdiction. The ship answered back. Not the computer. The ship itself. Jurisdiction, confirmed. Ownership, humanity. And then it fired its engines, in reverse. The vessel folded back into orbit and slammed into its escort fleet like a falling god. On the surface, Sarthkel stumbled backward. You've infected our systems, he whispered. You've been inside our military architecture for centuries. Mara finally turned to him. Not infected, she corrected. Integrated. A beat. You built your empire on arrogance, she continued. We built ours on redundancy. She tapped her insignia again. The silver pin on her collar cracked open like a shell. Inside it wasn't metal. It was code. Living architecture. A fragment of something vast enough that it didn't need a name anymore. Sarthkel's translator glitched. Then, for the first time, it spoke without translating. It spoke in Varelian. But it wasn't language. It was recognition. We have been here the whole time. The governor froze. That's not possible, he whispered. There is no artificial intelligence that can survive across interstellar latency without collapse. Mara gave a thin, humorless smile. Good thing we stopped calling it artificial. The ground shook again. Not explosions this time. Uplink activation. Every Varelian military terminal on Karth Prime lit up simultaneously with human access credentials. Not hacked. Not breached. Inherited. And then the second truth arrived. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a verdict. Across the battlefield feeds, across the Empire's internal nets, across civilian broadcast systems that had never been meant for war. A single image appeared. Earth. But not the Earth in Varelian records. Not the soft blue diplomatic world they had catalogued 9 centuries ago. This Earth was layered in orbiting constructs like rings around a predator's throat. Stations. Platforms. Engines that bent gravity instead of resisting it. And something worse. Something moving behind it. Sarthkel stared at the feed. That's not your homeworld, he said quietly. Mara's eyes didn't leave the burning sky. It used to be. The governor turned slowly toward her. You abandoned it? Mara shook her head once. No. A pause. We upgraded it. Far above Karth Prime, space tore open, not like a portal, but like fabric, remembering it had always been stitched wrong. Something massive began to descend through the rupture. Not a fleet. Not even a superweapon. A presence. And every Varelian sensor attempting to classify it returned the same result. Error. Observer too large for frame of reference. Sarthkel fell to his knees. What is that? Mara finally looked up. And for the first time, her voice softened. That, she said, is what your empire has been negotiating with for 900 years without realizing it. The governor's eyes widened. The treaty. Yes, Mara said. She stepped closer. You thought it was between governments. A pause. It wasn't. The sky split further. And something answered the planet. Not in language. In command structure. Across every human system in known space, dormant assets woke. Not fleets. Not armies. Something older. Something patient. Something that had been waiting for permission to stop pretending it was asleep. Sarthkel whispered. What did we sign? Mara Vance leaned in just slightly. And spoke the truth like a bullet finally reaching its target. You signed containment terms, she said. For us. A silence so absolute it made the explosions feel distant. Then the governor laughed. It was broken. Hysterical. Impossible. You're contained, he said. You're the weaker species. We let you live because you were manageable. Mara interrupted him gently. No, she said. We let you think that. Above them, the descending presence resolved further. Not a ship. Not a weapon. A structure of intelligence so vast it had to compress itself into physical law just to be perceived. And it spoke. Not to the galaxy. Not to the Empire. Only to the humans on the surface. Release authorization confirmed. Mara exhaled. Like someone setting down a burden carried too long. Sarthkel finally understood what was happening. This is your war doctrine, he whispered. Mara nodded once. Black Dawn wasn't the start, she said. It was the leash. The sky ignited again. But this time, the fire didn't come from destruction. It came from awakening. And somewhere deep inside the collapsing empire, every Varelian military system received one final transmission before silence. Ownership transfer complete. Humanity had stopped defending itself. Because it had finally remembered what it was built to be. And Karth Prime was just the first system to learn what that meant. When the leash broke, Karth Prime stopped being a planet in any meaningful sense. Not physically. Structurally, it was still there, oceans, cities, burning orbital wreckage raining down like broken gods. But politically, militarily, existentially, it had already been reassigned. Sarthkel could feel it. Not through sensors. Through absence. Every Varelian command channel had gone quiet. Not jammed. Not destroyed. Just, no longer answering to them. He stood slowly, staring at General Mara Vance like she had turned into something else entirely. "You said we signed containment terms," he whispered. "That's impossible. Containment implies we were the threat." Mara wiped blood from her lip with a steady hand. "You were," she said simply. "Just not to yourselves." Above them, the sky peeled open again. The descending structure, no longer ambiguous, no longer unknown, began to resolve into something almost understandable. A lattice of light and gravity, folded into impossible geometry. Not a ship. Not even a constructed object in the normal sense. A decision made physical. And it was still coming down. Sarthkel backed away. "This violates every known law of—" Mara cut him off. "Of your physics," she said. A pause. "You keep doing that," the governor snapped. "Doing what?" "Assuming the universe agreed with you." The ground trembled again. But this time, the tremor wasn't destruction. It was synchronization. Every Varelian weapon platform still intact began to hum in unison. Not targeting humans. Targeting something deeper. The Empire itself. On orbit, fleets tried to retreat. They didn't make it. Not because they were destroyed. Because they were redirected. Entire battle groups folded out of hyperspace lanes mid-jump and reappeared in formation around Karth Prime like obedient dogs returning to heel. One Varelian admiral screamed over comms. "We are being dragged. There's no inertial vector, no drive signature. What is pulling us?" Then silence. Then, very softly, "Home." Sarthkel looked up. "No," he whispered. No, this is not possible. Ships do not receive orders from space itself." Mara exhaled. "They do," she said. "When space remembers who built the door." The sky cracked again. And the presence finally arrived fully into local reality. It didn't land. It overrode arrival mechanics. One moment the sky was burning red with war. The next it was structured. Like reality had been edited. A vast shape hung above Karth Prime, visible only because it chose to be visible. And the galaxy, watching from distant systems through panicked relays, would later describe it as a crown turned upside down. Sarthkel dropped to his knees. "This is your weapon," he said, voice breaking. "This is what you kept hidden for 900 years. Mara looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "This is what we kept contained." The governor's head snapped up. "Contained from what?" For the first time, Mara hesitated. Not fear. Memory. Behind her eyes, something ancient flickered, older than the insignia, older than Black Dawn, older than the treaty itself. "We didn't start as a space-faring civilization," she said. "We started as a survival experiment." Sarthkel blinked. "That makes no sense." Mara gave a thin smile. "It didn't need to make sense," she said. "It needed to survive long enough to become a problem for someone else." Above them, the structure spoke again. This time not to humans alone. Not to Varelians alone. To the entire system. Subject species classification updated. A pause. Then, humanity, no longer contained. Every Varelian military system across known space received the same update. Not a virus. Not a hack. A rewrite. Fleet admirals saw their own command seals revoked mid-battle. Planetary governors found their defense grids reassigning allegiance. Weapons stopped firing at enemies and began auditing targets. Sarthkel's voice cracked. You turned our entire empire into your infrastructure. Mara shook her head once. No, she said. We just stopped pretending it wasn't already built on top of ours. The governor laughed weakly. This is conquest, he said. This is invasion. You've been preparing this for centuries. Mara stepped closer. Her voice dropped. This is correction. A pause. You should be grateful. Sarthkel stared at her in disbelief. Grateful? Mara gestured upward. Do you know what you were negotiating with for 900 years? Silence. Then she answered herself. Something that decided not to wake up fully. The sky above them rippled. And for a brief moment, every living being on Karth Prime experienced the same sensation. A massive intelligence noticing them individually. Not scanning. Not analyzing. Recognizing. And deeming them permissible. Sarthkel finally whispered the only question left. What happens now? Mara Vance looked up at the hovering impossibility in the sky. Then down at the burning ruins of the treaty site. Then at the governor. And she answered honestly. No, she said. We stopped pretending this was ever diplomacy. A pulse went through the air. Not energy. Authorization. Across the galaxy, dormant human systems began to unlock. Old fleets. Older stations. Things the Varelians had assumed were myths in classified archives. Things that had never been deployed because deployment required acknowledgement. And humanity had finally acknowledged itself. The crown-shaped structure above Karth Prime shifted slightly. And somewhere in the void between stars, something very large turned its attention fully toward the Varelian Galactic Empire for the first time. Not angrily. Not vengefully. Curiously. As if deciding whether the rest of the galaxy was worth reorganizing next. Sarthkel looked at Mara one last time. You never wanted peace, he said hollowly. Mara answered without hesitation. We did. A pause. But we were willing to outgrow it. And then the world went dark in a way that was not absence of light, but replacement of authority. The galaxy learns what humanity was for. The darkness didn't last. It never really does when something larger than your understanding decides you're still worth observing. Karth Prime returned to sight like a memory snapping back into focus. But nothing was the same. The burning skies were gone. The collapsing orbital wreckage had stopped falling mid-descent, suspended like ash held in glass. Entire fleets of the Varelian Galactic Empire hung frozen in space, alive, intact, but no longer permitted to continue their trajectories. Not destroyed. Paused. Sarthkel stood trembling, staring upward. What did you do? He whispered. General Mara Vance didn't answer immediately. Because she was no longer alone in her own head. The insignia at her collar was gone now, unfolded, expanded, dissolved into something that wasn't technology anymore. It was interface. Or perhaps truth, finally allowed to speak without compression. And through it, something vast continued to observe the situation. Not the Varelians. Not even humanity. The system. Mara finally spoke. We didn't do this, she said quietly. We finished it. Sarthkel turned sharply. Finished what? A pause. Then Mara answered, and this time her voice carried something heavier than command. Containment of a species that forgot it was built to survive gods. Silence fell across Karth Prime. Even the wind felt like it was waiting for permission. Above them, the crown-shaped intelligence shifted again. The galaxy-spanning structure, whatever it truly was, began to retract its overwhelming presence slightly, like someone stepping back from a table to let the players see the board. And for the first time, the truth became visible in layers. Not revealed all at once, but unfolded. The Varelian Empire was not the enemy. It was the audit. A test civilization seated around the galaxy long before their records began, designed to identify threats capable of destabilizing early-stage intelligent species. And humanity had passed. Too efficiently. Too quietly. Too persistently. Sarthkel's voice cracked. You're saying we were never an empire? Mara shook her head. No, she said. You were a filter. A pause. And we went through you. The governor staggered back as understanding finally broke something in him. So the treaty, he whispered. Mara nodded once. Was your attempt to keep us contained while you decided what to do with us? Above them, the structure confirmed it. Not in words. In a signal that translated itself into every surviving language simultaneously. Evaluation complete. Species, human. Outcome, uncontainable. Sarthkel laughed once, short, broken, almost disbelieving. All this time, he said. We thought we were the Empire judging you. Mara looked at him. You were never judging us, she said. You were measuring how fast we'd adapt when someone finally tried to stop us. A long silence followed. Then Sarthkel asked the only question that mattered now. Are you going to destroy us? For the first time, Mara hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer. Because the answer wasn't hers to give anymore. She looked upward. And the structure above responded. A calm, indifferent conclusion. Subjects of filter, retained. Integration protocol available. Sarthkel froze. Integration? Mara exhaled slowly. That's the other option, she said. Always has been. She glanced at the burning horizon, what had once been a ceremonial world, now quiet under suspended war. We don't do extermination, she added. Never have. A bitter smile. We just rewrite the terms of survival. The governor looked at her, something between hatred and awe in his eyes. And if we refuse? Mara met his gaze evenly. Then you stay what you are, she said. And eventually something worse than us finds you. That landed harder than any weapon ever could. Because every civilization in the galaxy, no matter how powerful, knew that truth deep down. There is always something worse. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, Sarthkel straightened. Not defeated. Not victorious. Something more complicated. Tell me, he said quietly, what do humans become when they are no longer contained? Mara looked up at the sky one last time. At the paused fleets. At the watching intelligence. At the galaxy that had just learned it was not alone in its own definition of power. And she answered. We become the thing that writes the next containment. A pulse went through the system. The suspended war machines flickered. And then, one by one, they powered down. Not destroyed. Not surrendered. Reassigned. Far across known space, human fleets that had not moved in centuries began to wake, not as weapons, but as custodians. Old stations lit up along forgotten trade routes. Deep space signals long thought to be dead began broadcasting again. Not war declarations. Not peace treaties. Something far older. Standards. The galaxy would later call it the night the Empire learned grammar. Because suddenly, every civilization understood the same terrifying reality. Humanity had never been trying to win wars. It had been defining the rules of existence itself. Sarthkel watched as the sky stabilized into calm, structured order. Then he looked at Mara Vance. You were never soldiers, he said softly. Mara gave a tired, almost human smile. No, she said. We were always administrators. And somewhere far above them, something vast and patient agreed. Not as a god. Not as a master. But as a system acknowledging its latest update. Status, humanity, active governing class of local galaxy. The long peace was over. Not because it broke. But because it had been promoted. And in the quiet that followed, for the first time in 900 years, no one in the galaxy dared to fire first again. And